critique of libertarianism. And you use in your book left, right, and so forth, and do they have a point that maybe left and right isn't as straight and easy to compartmentalize, and to what extent does it discourage dialogue when you put people in these labels that are full of emotion and can be a smear tactic, right? You go on Fox News and they say the left. We all know what that means, and we stop listening. We don't even listen to the person because he's of the left. In fact, this Matt Tavius, is that his name?
Matt Tavius.
Matt Tavius. We invited him to the conference, and we were told he's a leftist. What in the hell does that mean? Anyway, the academic world is packed. Everything I read now in your books and stuff like that, and the academic articles do the left and right. Tell me why, what's happened here?
Well, I can't really debate with the Lewis's book because they're right. I mean, this is exactly the kind of book that Oxford University Press should be publishing because, you read it, and after you read the book, you're less ignorant and confused than you were before you picked up the book, and that's the only thing professors are good for, is making you less ignorant and confused, and so the book does that. So I'm going to offer some extensions of their argument that is pertinent to this gathering. I do think the terms are useful to the extent that they identify our tribes. There are identifiable political tribes. The phenomenon that you've been complaining about, it is useful to have labels. So, I mean, look, I'm from Chicago, and you want to, really bitter divisions that are not a matter of any principles, Cubs or White Sox. Oh boy! It's not a matter of principle. Tribalism is a destructive force in our politics. I'd like to suggest, though, that that kind of tribalism is also here in the room with us. So libertarianism, it's the vision of freedom that Freedom Fest is all about. It's not as protean as left or right. It is a particular variety of liberalism, which is a determinate philosophy with a determinate goal. It holds that the purpose of government is to guarantee to individuals the freedom to live as they like. That is a determinate principle. There are lots of people who disagree with it. If you go and you talk to the governments of Russia or China, it turns out they're not quite so enthusiastic about that. So it's a determinate principle. And to the extent that you care about that too, we can be friends. And the concrete arguments are at the level of application. The distinctive claim of the sort of libertarians who gather here is that the best way to guarantee this freedom is to impose severe limits on government and bar much of the regulation and redistribution that's routine in contemporary America. And it's radical because it proposes to dismantle a lot of existing political institutions. Now, I think that this is a mistake. The book that I talked about earlier, Burning Down the House, argues that you can't have freedom without institutions. Structures of responsible regulation and non-market transfers of income and wealth are necessary preconditions of liberty. And to the extent that this gathering in Memphis is based on a philosophy that attacks those preconditions, you're going to get what you generally get without a strong impersonal state, which is a situation where people need to do the best they can to find powerful protectors. You think about the opening scene of The Godfather. And so if the political prescription is going to give you that, we really ought to be calling this feudalism fest.
Called a few names. It's not the
problem. Here is a nerdy academic point from analytic philosophy. Freedom is always of something, some agent, from something, to do, not become or not become something. And so if you only focus on the constraints emanating from the state while ignoring all other constraints and paying no attention to the actual actions that people are free to do, then you are going to end up with a stunted conception of liberty. So a person is not free if they are starving to death amid a prosperous society, even if nobody's coercing them. And I have found, and here's the relevance of the Lewis book, that libertarians have a tendency to believe a cluster of different and apparently unrelated claims. Isolationism in foreign policy, the desire to abolish the Federal Reserve, suspicion of redistributive taxation, skepticism about climate change, skepticism about COVID. These have nothing to do with one another. They are as unrelated as all of the unrelated issues that were described.
So you couldn't just say, hey, that's right wing.
No, no.
But you do in your book.
Professor, couldn't you say that there is a connective thread there, which is against rule by experts, against the assertion of illegitimate authority by people who claim to be better educated and have positions of power? I mean, I see a connective thread through everything you've said, from the Federal Reserve, which is this mysterious castle that makes money, to COVID bureaucrats.
Yeah, I'm chomping at the bit to get in here.
Yeah.
Yes, I know.
So I just end by saying that I think that there is an orthodoxy here, enforced with social sanctions. Either coal is or is not hurting the climate. You don't deduce that from abstract principles. You look at the science and try to figure out what's happening. And it seems to me that there's a danger here of entertaining palpably nutty ideas. So, the fact that, and frankly, libertarians pride themselves on their rationalism, yet Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is speaking here. I rest it.
We are open-minded. So Boyd, before you, I want to ask you a question, and you can say whatever you want.
I'm ready to unload.
You are a big fan of Ronald Reagan.
I love Ronald Reagan. I knew Ronald Reagan as John did.
Yeah, and I know Ronald Reagan too, and Ronald eschewed the left-right in this statement saying, hey, it's up-down. So why don't you do that?
Actually, in his interview with Mike Wallace in 60 Minutes, he said he was a libertarian.
Oh my God.
Remember that?
Well, that's a
You can go back and look at it in the archives. He called himself a libertarian. I really, I like a lot about the book. I really dislike the way that American politics are currently described, because I think it's a war between elites and the people. And that's why in my book, Counterpunch, which came out this year, I talk extensively about the uniparty and the fact that the elites in Washington generally agree, whether they're Republican or Democrat. And I can give you so many examples. Obamacare. After the Tea Party happened in 2008, then all of a sudden, in 2010, it was actually 2010.
Tea Party was later.
When they had the election. The Republicans repeatedly said, we're going to repeal Obamacare. We're going to repeal Obamacare. In fact, they voted, I think, 7 times, was it 7, John, to repeal Obamacare, to absolutely get rid of it. Until the Republicans had the power to repeal Obamacare. The minute Donald Trump was elected and said, I will sign that repeal bill, all of a sudden, you couldn't find the votes inside the Republican caucus to repeal Obamacare. And that is because when it comes to policy, it's always about the city, Washington, D.C., and how the elites are doing in that city and keeping money flowing to that city. And, Obamacare is such a great example. The only reason Obamacare ever passed was because Obama saw Hillary's mistake in not cutting a deal with the big drug companies. So what did he do? To get Obamacare, he cut a deal with the elites, the people that ran the drug companies. And so now you have Obamacare, you end health freedom. Health freedom is gone, but who is benefiting? Big health. Basically a military industrial size health complex. COVID policy minted 40 billionaires, 40 brand new billionaires. And it did it while it destroyed literally thousands of small businesses. It's all about the elites. okay?
But Floyd-
They had to suppress therapeutics
Floyd,
like
you're-
ivermectin. They had to suppress it because they had to have a policy that benefited the elites. So Republicans and Democrats, you couldn't find any light between the two. They were all for COVID policy. In Iraq, the Ukrainian war, there's no difference between the Republicans and Democrats. They're all for the military-industrial complex, okay? It is between the elites and the people who think they're so smart and the rest of us. And it's a wealth extraction machine to take money from our pockets and put it in theirs.
Floyd, I don't know what planet you were on, but at that time, they actually came very close to repealing Obamacare. That bill,
But they didn't.
but you said
They
no.
did not.
You said no Republicans supported it.
No, I didn't say no Republicans. I said they couldn't find the votes
Well,
in the
that's
caucus.
because Trump didn't know what he was doing.
Well, you can blame everything on Donald Trump, but the Republican Party should have presented the leadership to do that. Paul Ryan should have been able to do it. They didn't want to.
It passed the House under Paul Ryan.
Yeah,
It did.
well,
It did.
See, so you got to be more nuanced here. Floyd.
well, the truth is I see that as another example of the uniparty coming together to keep big health care.
Well, I'll agree with you at this point. The uniparty during that debate was symbolized by John McCain, who only belonged to one party. It was called the McCain Party. And that effectively became the uniparty in that famous vote. where he put thumbs down.
I want to get back to this labeling and stuff like that. So, are you bothered, Floyd? Are you bothered when you're linked to the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis? These terms are actually used to refer to right-wingers. And to me, I bristle when I hear that. It just angers me that somebody would call me right-wing. It reminds me of Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman had a great line. One time he was asked, he said, now, you're a monetarist economist, right? And Milton Friedman had a really interesting answer. He said, no, I'm not a monetarist economist. I'm not a supply-side economist. I'm not a conservative economist. I'm an economist. And I like the idea that somehow we can move toward this area of what's best for the individual. If we can drop the left, right, the liberal, conservative, and say, hey, what works? Can we just talk about what works? You want to talk about Obamacare, don't talk about left, right, just say, what's a good health care program?
But it's what works for whom, okay? You know, health freedom doesn't work for the big drug companies. You know, the peace doesn't work for the big military companies. You know, there's example after example of where a lot of things work for the elites, but they don't work for the people.
Yeah. So any policy is going to produce winners and losers. That's just, you know, any policy at all.
Sure. Right.
So you want to figure out what is actually going to produce better outcomes for all of the folks out there. One of the things that I admire about Ronald Reagan is that he's very sensitive to evidence. He was, he was distrustful of bureaucracy, distrustful of rule by experts. So one of the things that his Environmental Protection Agency people thought when they came in was that the Carter administration had proposed restrictions on lead and gasoline. And the Reagan people came in extremely suspicious of this because it was going to impose big costs on the petroleum industry. So they thought, we're going to restudy this from scratch. We're not going to trust any of what you guys are saying. We're going to look at the evidence ourselves. And they did, and after doing that, they imposed more stringent restrictions on lead and gasoline than the Carter people had imposed, because it turned out to be even worse than the Carter people thought. Now, I don't know how you do that without delegating some authority to experts, because you gotta know some biochemistry in order to know the effect of lead in gasoline on the brain development of children. I don't know who can decide that except experts.
I think what we're saying is party politics and ideology and labels get in the way of good policies all the time.
Yes.
Because you use these smear tactics, and they are smear tactics. When you get on Fox News and they say, well, so-and-so, we're going to now hear from this person, and this is the leftist point of view. Well, as soon as you hear that, you stop thinking.
Yeah,
Saying,
that's
oh, that's a
fine.
leftist position. I'm not even going to listen to it.
Right, you're in favor of
Instead of
environmental
saying,
regulation, you get called a
here
Marxist.
is a proposal, let's take a look at it, let's do a cost-benefit analysis, which economists like you are famous for doing, and let's try to be fair and balanced in a real way, not the Fox News way. So can I get a result? What do you take from what you've heard so far?
Yeah, well, I want to disagree mildly. I mean, look, we're not against labels. Labels is how we organize reality. We need categories. That's how we function. What we're against is delusions. And the problem with left-right is it gives the delusion that there is a philosophy behind each party. It's the Elizabeth Warren delusion we were talking about a moment ago. So the reality is the Democratic Party stands for a whole bunch of stuff, unrelated stuff. It's a basket. It's like a grocery basket. So if you go to the grocery store, you pick your own groceries. When we vote, we don't have that option. We are confronted with two baskets. Now those baskets are full of random positions. But to get back to John's point, the parties have an incentive to lie about this. They have every incentive in the world. Because imagine you get a fundraising letter from the Democratic Party that says, hi there, we're raising money for the Democratic Party, and our party stands for a whole bunch of stuff. And some of it's good, some of it's bad, so please donate. Now, that's the reality, but you're not going to get out your checkbook if you get that letter. But if you get a letter that says, we're the Democratic Party and we stand for social justice, and all of our policies stand for social justice, and we are fighting the forces of right-wing fascism, and we have to stop the right, then suddenly you're going to get out your checkbook because you believe the Democratic Party is totalizing everything it believes in is social justice. So we're against the delusion that the parties stand for a philosophy. So do we need categories? Sure. There's groups of people. There is a group in our country that is blue, the Democratic Party, tribe left if you want to call it that. That's real. So using a label to describe, hey, this person belongs to this tribe, fine, do it. Just like you can say this person is a fan of the New York Knicks or the LA Lakers. That's fine. But don't lie to us and tell us that all the players on the Lakers team share some kind of essential characteristic, and you're cheering for all those players because you believe in some deep philosophy.
Another thing you do is historical work in your book. Both of you do this history where you start with the left, right, and the French Revolution. Okay, so who is the left?
Well, I mean, to point out...
who is the left?
The last point we had was about elite versus ordinary people.
They were the ones that wanted change, right? They were the ones who wanted to, they didn't like the monarchy.
And the church.
And they wanted to start their own democratic assembly. They hated the Catholic Church and so forth. Those who sat on the right were defending the traditional views, right? They were the conservatives.
The Ancien regime.
Right. Now, do you know what side Frederick Bastiat sat on, who's known as a right-winger? He sat on the left. So this demonstrates the real problem with historical shifting and where ideology can change and so forth. Just like the word liberal was captured by FDR, and he started using the term liberal and it kind of caught on. And now in the United States,
per what the professor said, there was the concept of negative liberty that was used to dominate with liberalism. Then T.H. Green and others in Britain talked about positive liberty. If you're starving, you're not truly free.
Right.
So that became the great split, and that's how the use of the word liberal changed.
But it is interesting that if you go to Europe and you talk about liberal to them is the old traditional classical liberal view. In Latin America, neoliberalism is looked down upon because that is the Chicago school of the Chilean model and so forth, and it's been rejected. So I think we have a lot of problems here, but we've only got 10 minutes. I'd like to open it up and see, does anybody have any questions or comments to any of our discussions here or would like to make a comment? Or should we continue?
I think I see a hand.
Is there a hand out there?
There are hands out there, just
wait a
whether we
minute.
see
Come
them
up
or
to the
not.
mic. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have a concern. As a conservative, I'm totally frustrated at our media. And how do we, I know Fox News was created to counter MSNBC and CNN, but it just seems like, as a conservative, I think there's only one immoral person worse than the Democratic Party, and it's the Democratic media. How do you fight that?
Well, one thing I would like to note here is that there is this tribalism that's very apparent and is really bad in this country. There used to be a time when CNN would have both views on their perspective.
I used to go on CNN.
Yeah.
I was on Crossfire all the time.
Crossfire is no longer around.
I'm the only person on this panel who's been fired by Fox, fired by MSNBC, and fired by CNN.
This is
and
great
fired,
to have you.
and fired by PBS. I've been fired by everybody.
So, and I notice I turn on CNN and they only interview Democratic congressmen. And then when I go on Fox News, they only interview Republicans. And this is wrong. We have lost something in this country where, and that's one reason, at Freedom Fest, we tried as much as possible to bring together differing perspectives and so forth. And by the way, I can't wait to interview Mike Rowe, because Mike Rowe is on CNN, he's on NBC, he's on Fox News, he's on PBS, all the places where you've been fired, and they all call him his friend. So the question I'm asking him, and I think it's a really good one, what's your secret? Because why is it that everybody is so divisive? And of course, I think the answer is he's in the trades and the work ethic, and everybody's in favor of that.
You got to look at multiple media. You've got to look at the New Republic and the National Review. You've got to expose yourself to more than one source.
But nobody does that. Just by a show of hands, how many of you watch all the channels? You turn them on and you watch fairly all the channels.
I read the New
Or
York
you
Times.
just watch Fox News.
I'm a subscriber to the New York Times.
And the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal.
Well, let me just.
But
make
there is a lot of bias
there-
in there,
well,
that's for sure. Yeah.
I hate to make a simplistic statement, but I think it actually has some currency here. I have spent my entire career in print journalism, so I do have a bias there, but I have been in broadcast journalism since 1990. I've done radio, I've done podcasts, I've done cable TV, I've done all of that. Let me tell you my conclusion from that. I decided my goal in life, having seen how the sausage was made on broadcast television, was to try to be on television more than I ever watched it. Now, I'll never succeed on that. Let me tell you, anyone here who watches television, fine. It's mud wrestling and arm wrestling and stage WWF wrestling. Those are all great.
But it's not.
But it's wrestling. If you want news and information, read. It's an old-fashioned concept, but read. I don't care what you read, but read. Do not, I swear to you, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, all have the same flawed incentive structure. They'll give you the same flawed information. And let me tell you, if you really want to know if you're watching as a reasonable adult of reasonable education, because you're here, you're interested in current events. I can guarantee you what you're watching on those three networks, where it comes from. It comes from 23-year-old producers with an attention span of 30 seconds and a serious case of ADD. Those are the people who actually make the decisions. Yeah. Don't think the guests are picked by the host. Tucker Carlson is a rare exception. They are picked by 23-year-old producers who basically know nothing and who are scared to lose their job. Therefore, they just put on, the traditional left-right fights. That's what they do. So don't watch it if you want news and information. Watch it if you want to watch wrestling.
But the other thing, don't read social media. Social media is like a cancer.
Use social media.
Question.
Oh, we do.
Use social media.
Sure?
Don't send stuff out. Don't read it.
Yeah, well, that's what.
If you have a question, you need to go up to the podium there and so forth. But
Yeah.
Right,
Why not
there-
something like
question.
this?
He's been